It's no secret that one of the better performing videos on my channel is my analysis of what dreams may come. The fact that it speaks to people on so many levels, I think, has given it that universal appeal. If you're religious, you can take something from it. If you're agnostic or atheistic, you can still take something from it. Its idea of suicide not being a punishment from a higher power, but a self-inflicted punishment, kind of like suicide itself, you could argue. The idea that soulmates are a thing, which I know a lot of people kind of are very much like, I think it's a 50-50 split. Some people love the idea, some people hate it, but the idea that soulmates exist and they're the ones who will help you out of that. They're the only ones with the strength and the connection to you to be able to pull you out. All of that, it made it such a beautiful film, which is a word I use quite heavily in the video. I have been reassured that it's not too much, but there are a lot of other beautiful pieces out there, and I don't think it's any surprise that someone eventually recommended Mitch Albom's The 5 People You Meet in Heaven, written for the screen by Mitch himself from his own book, directed by Lloyd Kramer, starring Jon Voight, Ellen Burstyn, Jeff Daniels, and Dagmar Dominczyk. This was, dare I say, a beautiful piece. Now, this isn't something I came across myself. Like I say, it was suggested, and the great Tim Pitt 25. I did get round to it. It was less than 2 years, like with other suggestions in the past. But this was one that I was reluctant to see. I was like, is it going to be religious kind of, overbearing stuff or anything like that? Is it going to be comparable? Am I going to like it as much as What Dreams May Come? Now, and I said before, expectations do inform a lot of the end result. And I did start watching with that expectation and a kind of dread of, I've kind of got to watch this at least to see if it's good enough because someone's asked me to. I do feel that commitment. But whilst it kind of felt a bit plodding at the start, I slowly but surely got into it. Now, I would agree with some people out there, because obviously when I was looking just to check, the names of certain actors, particularly Dagmar Dominczyk, who does a great turn as Marguerite, I did notice a couple of reviews after I'd watched it, so it wasn't really too bad, and I'd already sort of planned what I was going to say. And there is one criticism which I will agree with before I go into the good, because I think we need to devote more time to the good, because there is a lot here. And that is that it's a little over 2 hours. It's about 2 hours 10 minutes, give or take. And it could have been shorter. It could have been compressed a little. That said, I haven't read the book. There is someone in those reviews who has, and said it's fairly respectful and fairly, accurate. So maybe that extra time was needed so that we weren't lost. But I did like the idea of the opening. The American Beauty style opening almost. It made me think of that. And it was only about 5 years after. I think it was about 2004 this came out, or this was at least produced. But I did like that, the narration, sort of guiding us through. I think it was a great way to keep the threads. And, we see this guy, what we first assume is a cantankerous maintenance man by the name of Eddie, played by Jon Voight. And, we then learn that, no, he's actually decent. He spends time with the kids. He goes and, makes them little pipe cleaner animals and, sort of spends his time. And eventually he's, made aware of one of those kind of drop coaster things, which I've always hated because they're just terrifying as a concept, just suddenly dropping. I do have a bit of a fear of heights. Well, it's not a fear of heights, it's a fear of falling, let's be honest. But the idea of that just terrifies me, so this film has just cemented the fact that I will never go on one, I think now. I was kind of almost coming to maybe I might do it at some point, but no. Because a cable snaps and it falls, and in a last heroic act, he sees the girl who he'd done a pipe cleaner rabbit for earlier, tries to get her out of the way, feels her hands, which is a common thread that keeps coming up. And suddenly he's at a very quiet Ruby Pier, which is where the fairground is, which is where he's the maintenance man. Very quiet, and one of the freaks from the freak show of years ago when he was a kid is there. And he's guided through a series of their own versions of heaven. These people apparently all have lessons. This is what the 5 people you meet are there to do. They had 5 people, who had 5 people, who had 5 people. And this is the theme, definitely, of the piece. It's very much about people affecting people. But I will come to that at the end. I think we need to close out with the overarching message. But he's guided through these different vignettes. You know, Jeff Daniels is great as the blue skin guy, the blue man. I didn't quite get it at first because the beard and the blue skin threw me, but I was like, oh, that's Jeff Daniels. Oh, okay. That's who he is. You know, and he goes through and meets his old captain and all these people and just reconnects with parts of his life. And it starts out very, you know, hopeful and happy. It's like, oh, when you were a kid, you know, you were great and all this, but you kind of killed me. You know, it was one of those things of, ooh, okay. And, you know, it got more serious as it went through the war and things like this. And that's what kind of gripped me, that escalating sense. Like, it started out very pleasant, you know, this lovely version of heaven, then in wartime, and it was really, as I say, just grabbing me slowly but surely over time to sort of this conclusion that, well, like I say, we'll get to. But each one, like I say, had a lesson to teach. And the first one, because, you know, he was just a kid, he was playing in the street, and the guy, you know, was like, oh no, I've got to avoid the kids playing. He accidentally sort of crashed and apparently had a heart attack. That was what the police report said. But Eddie feels guilt about this. You know, he's like, oh, I'm so sorry. He's like, no. And the first lesson is, you know, that life and death isn't fair. Things happen. But because he swerved out the way, because he had that accident and he eventually died, Eddie got to continue his life. So while things may not be fair, things may not, you know, always work out as we want, but good can come from it. The fact that Eddie survived to have his life. And again, a common thread that comes out, you know, Eddie's like, but I'm just a maintenance man. That's all I was. I just repaired the rides. I just looked after Ruby Pier. That's not much. But it was enough. But that's when we start asking about, you know, the girl. He's like, I felt her hands, you know, I held them. But did I, like, pull her away or something? It's like, I can't answer that for you. And they all say that, you know. I'm not going to each time say, and then he says this again. But each time, you know, it's the, you know, have I saved her? And none of them can answer it until the end. You know, it's always the idea that someone can. Which was kind of giving me the idea that maybe she was the fifth one. You know, it was actually that he didn't succeed, but she was going to be fine with it, or something like that. But it wasn't the case, but we'll get there. So the second one, of course, was, you know, his captain in the war. And, you know, I'm not going to go in detail over all these vignettes. There are great moments in all of them. And I think it's really, if you've got this far into the video, by the way, and you haven't seen it yet, that was a silly move. I've probably put a spoiler warning on the titles, but really watch it if you haven't. Because there's a lot of nuances that I'm going to miss out because, you know, I'm trying to not go on for 3 hours. But the second one, like I say, his captain, he had an injury in the war, and it was his captain who did it to save him from himself. He was going into this burning building kind of crazy that, you know, there was someone in there who he had to save, but the captain and no one else could see it. And he was kind of just, like I say, just potentially going to burn to death. So his captain ended up shooting him in the leg. And then, of course, he got killed on a landmine. And his message is, you know, it was a sacrifice. Sacrifice is a good thing. You know, everyone sees sacrifice as a bad thing. We say it even on, like, low-end sacrifices. I mean, his sacrifice was obviously a really big one. But even on low-end things, you know, people say, oh, I've sacrificed a lot with a down kind of tone to it. But that's worthwhile. That is a good thing. If you sacrifice something, it means that someone else has benefited. Whether it be life for a life or something less severe, something less grand. And that's worthwhile. And that's a great message from the captain. But the third person was very much a quick tonal shift. It very much changed how we were moving forward here. Because it wasn't someone who he knew he had a direct connection with. It was some random old woman who, you know, played brilliantly by Ellen Burstyn. Great piece, great performance from her. And it's just this moment of what's going on here. And we learn, you know, that she's actually the person that Pier's named for. Her history is very different, but it doesn't intertwine with Eddie's in the same way. But we come to the end, and, you know, he's bitter about the fact that his dad was so violent with him, really. He was very aggressive, very judgmental, very down on him. I suppose, if you're looking at it through a lens of positivity, he was trying to get the best out of him. But it's very hard to see that when you're in it. But we learn that his dad didn't die how he thought. He didn't come home ridiculously drunk, having fallen in some water. A good friend, and a guy from, when I first saw him, I thought, this guy seems creepy. Mr. Shea. He was, I'm assuming, trying to kind of assault his mother, possibly sexually. And, Dad comes back and chases him out. The guy jumps into the river because clearly he's at the end of his rope as well. His life hasn't been good. He's just been fired. But his dad goes to save him, and that's what gives him the pneumonia. And our lovely Ruby, her husband was in the hospital next to the dad. And she knows that he was calling for everyone. The mother, the brother, and most importantly, Eddie. And we get a touching scene, of forgiveness. Because that's what the third message is. Hurting others through hate is difficult. A lot of the time, you're only hurting yourself. In some cases, you're hurting both of you. But you never come out of it scot-free. She also expands on the idea that we are born into this world, and when he arrives in heaven as well, it's a similar idea, as pure. We have no hate, we have no malice, we have no evil. And that is something that piles on over time. We get annoyed with this, we get annoyed with that, we don't say it, we don't act on it, we don't do things, we just let things fester. We let things sit in us, and they take root, and like I say, they make us worse people. And that's such a beautiful message. I do want to kind of go over these again towards the end, because some of them are very, very deeply personal to me. And this was one of them. This was one of the big ones that I think I really kind of was on board for, shall we say. But that leads us to the fourth one, where I was expecting her to be somewhere on the list. It was clear she wasn't with us anymore. But Marguerite's section, he gets to spend some time with her again, and we learn that she had some kind of illness, whether it was cancer or something like that, because at first I thought Parkinson's, but she only shakes once and it's very severe. That isn't how Parkinson's works. It's very much a slow build, and it's a constant. There's at least a low-level tremor most of the time, especially at the time that she was alive. There may be sort of anti-seizure kind of drugs that can help now, but she would have been kind of like that constantly, and she wasn't. So I think it's something else, maybe something like a brain tumour or something. He obviously loses her, and her lesson to him is, you didn't lose me. Not really. You still have memories. They are with you. Those memories will live on. Because the person may die, but love doesn't. And that's what fuels these memories. The memories are love. And I think that is a really beautiful one too. It's one of those where I think we've all lost people. We've all kind of, felt that we're never going to see someone again. And we forget that we can at any moment. We can just bring up their image. We can bring up something they did. We can bring up a moment we had with them in our minds. And that's good. But our last person that we meet, our fifth person, is a bit of a turn, really, from the others. They've all been a very positive message. There's been less good elements, but there's been a positive message to them from the get-go. We've kind of been able to go, okay, you're going to be teaching something interesting here. This is just a way for him to learn. Ruby definitely, and the Blue Man in particular. But Tyler was a hard one, and rightly so. He's been given all these wonderful life lessons. He's been given this positivity, but he needs to answer for his actions. He needs to be aware that what he's done had an impact. He meets the girl who was in the place where he was screaming, "I'm a soldier, come out." The thing that technically his captain stopped him doing. His sacrifice here could have meant she lived. But she forgives him, like he forgave his father. And that forgiveness is what he needed. It was the last bit. to realise that she effectively made a form of sacrifice too. By him being able to carry on, he could keep other children safe. By repairing the rides, by looking after them, by giving them little pipe cleaner animals, he could keep the kids safe. That was his role. He more than made up for that one loss. At the end of the day, he was a prisoner of war, and he was not in a good place anyway. It's kind of not okay, but it's understandable what he did. And she accepts that. She allows him the peace. And finally, he can go to his own heaven. Ruby Pier, with all the people whose lives he has saved. And those are the 5 lessons. Those 5 lessons that I think we all need to learn. And the fact that, Mitch Albom has given us a chance to learn those lessons before we get to heaven might put us in good stead. I mean, there are some of them that, I'm already aware of. Like I say, the 3rd one particularly, forgiveness is the way forward. Grudges, hate, it doesn't help. With my issues with BPD and things like that, it was partly that was an element of it. And, part of BPD is learning to let go. And I'd already got this lesson down, so I was quite sort of, it was a wonderful moment in many ways, because it was like, yeah, I remember this. I remember how to get past that. But the big overarching message that we get keyed into at the end is that we're just people. We're just stories.
And the world is full of stories. But the stories are all one.
And what matters most is the fact that we all have our stories to tell, to be. And they will affect other people's stories. Because in the end, all stories are one. It's all the story of humanity on Earth, or maybe in the future on other planets, who knows. But it will still be part of the same story. This, me talking to you now, giving my thoughts and my interpretation and my love of, I'm going to say it again, a beautiful film, is my story connecting with all of yours. And is there anything more beautiful than that? I don't think so. I said beautiful again. But this one really, really, I loved. And I thank you again, Tim Pitt 25. And like I say, I dreaded it because I always feel like when someone's requested it, I've got to watch it. I have that commitment. It's a weird little thing in my brain. I will do it eventually at some point, and I put it off longer than I should. And I'm sorry for that. But at least you didn't have a 2-year plus wait. But thank you so much for letting your story touch mine in this way. So next week we're back to probably doom and gloom, actually, I think, knowing what I've got planned, but it's all part of the story, so don't you join me for everything coming. But until then, as always, thank you for watching, and take care.